Hello everyone, welcome back to the Warzone. I'm Scruffy and this is, as always, Scruffy Tales. And today we are gonna take a look at Kursk and Pokrovsk to kinda try and figure out how Ukraine and Russia are trying to get the strategical upper hand in this war. And we're gonna start off with Pokrovsk down in Ukraine, where Russia is mercilessly pushing towards the city itself. So, up here you have Pokrovsk, down here you have Avdiivka, where Russia took some serious amounts of casualties trying to push in, and then they have steadily pushed out this way. They had a breakthrough towards Ocheretine, and at the time, I thought that Russia was gonna be pushing more aggressively northward to try and surround Toretsk, and also to try and push up here to this point in the highway to reach this intersection here, because this is a vital logistical route leading from Pokrovsk up to Chasiv Yar. So I figured Russia wants to cut that supply line and also move in and surround Toretsk. But I also acknowledged that maybe Russia is heading for Pokrovsk. I didn't believe it at the time, but I did say that if they're heading for Pokrovsk, they're going to be following the railroad. And, well, they have. From Ocheretine, they pushed out towards Prorezh and then to, what's that, Svahoe? What was this town down here? Anyway, and as you can see, they have steadily followed the railroad, and obviously that's because it is snaking its way between all the obstacles in the terrain, and at the end it heads to Pokrovsk, and Ukraine. Russia can now also utilize each town in turn, and that potentially the still intact or somewhat intact train station at each location for logistical purposes. They can now use the railroad to bring in forces relatively close to the front line, say to Ocheretine, for instance, and then they can drive them out much faster to the actual fighting. Here we can see that Russia has recently claimed a lot of territory. I mean, this push here basically created a pincer move, and here's a big lake and stuff, and the Ukrainians over here had to fall back not to be trapped, more than likely. So that is why now Russia made this push and can now claim this entire area here. And so yes, Russia is trying to push up to Pokrovsk, more than likely trying to push through here, through a town called Krasny Yar, because then they can get in behind these larger settlements, Novorodivka, and up here at the bridge, Rodivka. So pushing through here can allow them to go through Ukrainian lines and come up behind two severe obstacles that will leave the road more or less open to Pokrovsk. They still have Mirnorad to deal with. But you get the overall point here. They're pushing towards Pokrovsk along this railroad for the reasons mentioned. And to highlight why they're trying to avoid Novorodivka, they are still applying pressure here because they don't want Ukraine to be able to move troops around. So they're going to keep up the pressure on Rodivka, going to keep up the pressure on Novorodivka, but they will try and break through here. And why are they trying to avoid Novorodivka? Well, it's lodged between these two rivers, streams, creeks, whatever you want to call them, and that kind of funnels the Russians into this town. And this is a city with some high-rise buildings, but more importantly, and also the 47th Mechanized Brigade, one of Ukraine's most battle-hardened veterans. This is a tough opponent for the Russians, and they are holding this area here. But I mean, if Russia fights their way through the town, what happens then? Then they come up to this point. Take a look. Waterways easily defended, and urban area right smack in the middle here. So they're gonna be funneled into this narrow choke point, right? This will not be a fun place to fight at. And then Ukraine has some slag heaps, high ground, gonna be bombarded by Russia, but it gives Ukrainians the theoretical high ground that allows them to fire anti-tank guided missiles and can set up positions to direct indirect fire and stuff like that with binoculars I mean, that's usually done with drones these days. I'm a bit old school here, but you get the point. This is a good defendable position with lots of buildings, waterways that will funnel the enemy into these buildings where you can set up very good defenses and what have you. So Russia really don't want to fight here, especially against the 47th. They will, as we can see here, they're more than likely trying to push in here to these smaller villages where they can more easily punch through and get in behind the Ukrainians. And if they get up here, Rodivka is basically cut off. You can see the waterways here. And if they get in here, Novorodivka, well, will be hard pressed to hold, especially if Russia keeps pushing south of it. They will have to fall back as well. So this here, Krasnoyar, this small village, this is where this perimeter holds or falls. If Russia gets through, the next battle will be for Mirnorad, and Russia will begin to push in towards Pokrovsk with a vengeance. And to emphasize what I've been talking about, Krasnoyar located up here. And here you have that narrow choke point that Russia doesn't want to get stuck in. This here, as you can see, you have Kryty-Yar, slightly south of Krasnoyar. Here you have the slag heaps, the choke point, and Russia trying to push in along the highways here, the country roads rather, to get into this small village of Krasnoyar. And from here, as you can see, they can spread out along the roads using forest belts, windbreaks, and what have you. Lots of terrain to maneuver infantry in, and then they can get in behind the Ukrainians and cut them off, like I just said. So here we go. Why Pokrovsk? Why is Russia so hell-bent on reaching Pokrovsk, right? Located right here. What's going on? I mean, they've been trying to reach Chasiv Yar, Toretsk. Why Pokrovsk? Why not Toretsk? I mean, if you take all of this territory and aim it upwards, concentrate all of this territory upwards, they would have taken Toretsk by now, right? A city they want. But why are they so hell-bent on Pokrovsk? Well, the reason is, if you take a look at all of these lines, from Pokrovsk, when the front line was back here in Avdiivka, these highways leading out from Pokrovsk were the main supply routes for Ukraine, bringing in supplies, vehicles, and reinforcements to the front line. So by pushing out towards Pokrovsk, they now intend to cut these supply lines. I first thought, like I said, I first thought they wanted this small intersection here to cut the supply lines up to Konstantinivka, but no, they're focusing, they are hell-bent on Pokrovsk. Taking Pokrovsk, they cut the supplies up to Chasiv Yar and Toretsk via Pokrovsk, right? And also, if you take a look at these gray lines here, these are railroad tracks. A lot of supplies, manpower, vehicles, and what have you, resources can be brought in en masse via these trains leading to Pokrovsk, and then you unload it to trucks and drive it at speed along the highways to the front line to support troops. So reaching Pokrovsk, Ukraine can no longer bring in all of those reinforcements and all those supplies by train to this area and then ship it out. They have to go north to do that. I'll take a look at that in a minute. And also, there's a railroad leading from Donetsk through Avdiivka, Ocheretino, like I said, all the way to Pokrovsk. So if they take Pokrovsk, Russia can utilize this railroad to bring in all the troops, manpower, reinforcements that they need to use this as a base of operations to further expand in the area. So taking Pokrovsk, they heavily reduce Ukraine's fighting ability along this front line here, and also gives Russia an excellent opportunity to push out from Pokrovsk as they want to put more pressure on the Ukrainians in this entire region. So, if Russia holds Pokrovsk, they cut the supply lines leading to Pokrovsk, and then there are no supplies leading up this way to Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and the rest of the front line. Everything will have to come in from the north, right? That means you put a lot of more pressure on these highways and the railway system leading into Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Konstantinivka, and then finally out to the front line. So that is what Russia is after. Taking Pokrovsk to cut the easy supply routes, forcing Ukraine to have logistical issues in the north, and it also allows Russia to outflank Ukrainians and operate in this area and put more pressure on Chasiv Yar, put more pressure on Toretsk to gain operational success in this entire region. And just to highlight it a bit more here, here from Konstantinivka all the way up to Sloviansk and this river, the Oskil River, you have a string of cities, large cities, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and then you have cities like Druzhkivka and Konstantinovka. And in between here, there's an endless line following this river, an endless line of towns. So this is basically a fortified line of fortifications. I mean, a town or a city is essentially a massive bunker complex when you think about it, like with all those concrete buildings, high-rise buildings. This is just an endless line of bunkers that Russia will never be able to fight their way through it, right? And then this line connects with a river on top of it. So this here is pretty much secured from the point of Ukraine. So Russia needs a way to move around it, and they need to cut the supplies from Pokrovsk to be able to push in south of this defensive line and get in behind it, allowing them to operate freely down here and then freely behind this line. And then they can move up and cut one road after the other, railroads leading into these cities, into these lines, into these towns rather. And that is how they will probably try and bring down this impressive fortification that all of these cities and towns create along this river, along this purple line here. So that is what Pokrovsk means for Russia. It allows them to gain control here, and that allows them to move up here to overcome this impenetrable obstacle. I'll try and remember to provide a link to this Associated Press article, which highlights a problem along the front line down at Pokrovsk, and that is that Ukraine has of late received a lot of fresh recruits that are, according to the veterans, poorly trained, and they are unable to hold the line as required. They falter under fire, unfortunately. This is sadly nothing new. I made a video, like it says here, 8 months ago that I called Cannon Fodder, the grim reality of total war in Ukraine, where I highlighted the fact that many Ukrainian soldiers only receive 3 days of training. The lucky ones get 3 weeks before they're shipped off to the front lines. This is, of course, also an issue in the Russian army. The Russians are doing the same thing because both sides need manpower here and now in order to win the engagements they are locked in. And it's a real problem because Ukraine can't afford to have empty trenches. They need troops, they need rifles in those trenches. So they can't wait 3 or 4 months to train soldiers, because if they do that, Russia will overwhelm the troops that are trying to hold the trenches. So you need to get those troops out fast. It's just a real unfortunate reality for Ukraine at this point. So the question is, do you want to hold the trenches with 50 veterans, or do you want to hold them with 50 veterans together with 200 fresh recruits? I mean, remove the recruits, the 50 veterans won't be able to hold the trench line anyway, right? So you send out these fresh recruits, barely able to contribute, hoping that they will at least fire a couple of shots before they break and run, essentially. And some of them might even live up to the standards of the veterans, and that may help them actually hold the line. Right? So it's a really grim, tough situation for Ukraine, making these decisions, sending troops into combat without being properly prepared. I mean, but if they don't, the trenches will be empty, and then Russia will just push on through without any issues at all. They will outflank and surround the veterans that are trying their best to hold the line, and then those veterans will be slaughtered. It's tough. Let's put it that way for Ukraine. But speaking of Russia having similar issues to Ukraine, take a look at this. This is also from Associated Press. The offensive has also come at a huge cost to Moscow, with an estimated 70,000 troops lost in 2 months, according to the UK Defense Ministry. That is just insane. They have not even reached Pokrovsk yet. A city fight that will be far more deadly than anything Russia has faced so far trying to reach Novorodivka and Krasny Yar, right? 70,000 so far, not yet at Mirnorad or Pokrovsk. I mean, it's just insane the amount of troops Russia is throwing at the Ukrainian trenches at the moment. But that's not all. Russia evolves, they adapt, and they shift tactics. And they have now gone away from these mass assaults, like we've heard of, and switched things around. As it says, another challenge for Ukraine is a new tactic in which Russia deploys recurrent waves of smaller infantry units of 2 to 4 men. And this makes it difficult for Ukraine's drone operators, who find it difficult to target them, according to a drone operator with the 25th Brigade. And as he says, this is one of the main reasons for Russia's success in Pokrovsk. It's harder to detect them. And they're, like I said, they're moving along the windbreaks and along the rivers where there's a lot of bushes and greenery and what have you. And as he continues, as soon as the infantry gets under the tree lines, it's really hard to get them out of there with drones, and that's why we depend a lot on our infantry, right? So these smaller units, harder to spot. It's not as easy to call in artillery and mortars, and the drones can't really reach them as you want as well when they're in cover of the trees. Hard to spot. They can move in sneakily, get into position, and then they can build up a force. As I imagine, closer to the Ukrainian lines, launch an assault on foot, and then they face fresh Ukrainian recruits who try their best, but it's difficult in this war to be a fresh recruit and with minimal training, and then you have 100 Russians all of a sudden out of nowhere charging your positions. Really, really difficult to counter this for Ukraine. But as we've seen, they do try their best. It's not like this is a like some magical tactic for Russia. They have lost 70,000 troops, right? Ukraine is fighting back. Ukraine is doing what they can to hold the line, and Russia has to this point lost an estimated 70,000 troops and have not yet reached Pokrovsk. So that's all I have to say about Pokrovsk. That is why they're trying to grab Pokrovsk, and now you know why they are able to advance. And also, quite clearly, Ukraine is putting up a fight. If we look at all the casualties that Russia has suffered so far, and those casualties are important as we now move on to Kursk. So remember those Russian casualties because they will be important. So What is Ukraine up to in Kursk? Well, I think, like I said in a previous video, they are after three counties, rayons, as they are called in Russia. You have the Oblast, that is kind of like a state, and the state, the Oblast, is divided into counties, rayons. And Ukraine appears to be after Sudzha County, Koronevo County, and Glushkovo County. Uh, by the looks of it. And now that Russia is sending in more and more troops, it's going to be more and more difficult for Ukraine to expand this front line. So that is why I don't think they wanted to push out any further. They are happy with these three counties. And especially Glushkovo County. Now in hindsight, I think it's very obvious what the plan was. Push into Sucha, and if you follow troop movements, they move pretty much early on straight north towards Koronevo and the river Seim in order to isolate and cut off troops in the north from the troops in Glushkovo, and then they blew up all the bridges, and they are now hunting the Russian engineers trying to put up pontoon bridges. So they wanted to isolate this county right from the get-go. That was the plan. Push in, swing north to Koronevo and the river, and then begin clean up operations in Glushkovo. And everything is so far going to plan for Ukraine. They also proved that there are no red lines. Russia will not use nukes to prevent an invasion of its own territory. And also now they have some pretty valuable real estate in case you end up with negotiations this winter if Trump wins the presidential election and wants to try and be the big negotiator in this conflict. Also taking Sucha, they cut some important highways and railroads leading south towards Belgorod Oblast and the Kharkiv front. So it makes it more difficult for Russia to send reinforcements, supplies, equipment, and what have you from the north down south to Belgorod. So that is what Ukraine is after, and it's looking good so far. As soon as Glushkovo County is in Ukrainian hands, this will be an operational success for Ukraine, and they have grabbed quite a lot of territory in just a few weeks' time if you compare to Russian successes in this war. And I mean, take a look, all of this in just a few weeks. This has taken months for Russia to achieve. Same thing down here, the push to Pokrovsk, months. And then they've been attacking along the entire front line, and beyond here and here, Russia has not that much to show for. They had some success here, but then Russia has since then been pushed back. So after months and months and months of fighting, Russia has, not that much to show for. Meanwhile, Ukraine, in just a few short weeks, have taken Russia and the world by complete surprise. And what Ukraine is hoping for, and I think what Ukraine was hoping for, was for Russia to panic and basically abandon the Kharkiv campaign and send all of these units up here. And that would have allowed Ukraine to fortify the front line, push Russia out, and send a lot of troops down south to Pokrovsk. I think Russia played it smart, decided, no, we're not going to panic. We're not going to fall for that. We're going to stay in control of this situation and keep the eye on the ball, which is Pokrovsk, and then slowly allocate troops up to Kursk to contain the incursion, while we also slowly build up a proper force that can push in and contest Ukraine's advances in Kursk and then eventually push them out. I think that is Russia's plan, and I think they're playing to their strengths at the moment. So the slow response, I think, is a smart move from Russia, trying to avoid panic and trying to avoid overreacting. But they are still gathering troops in Kursk, and they have to pull them from somewhere, and they are pulling them from various positions along the front line, from Kherson, Zaporizhia, from Kupiansk, from Kharkiv, to slowly assemble this force that can challenge Ukraine in Kursk. And that is what Ukraine is after, because as this happens, it gives them here and there an advantage to push in and advance upon the Russians. And now that provides a problem for Russia. Because if Ukraine keeps pushing at all these locations and starts gaining some territory, do you really want, as a Russian commander, to remove troops from those locations, right? If you know, okay, we pulled out some troops and Ukraine is instantly exploiting that, do you want to pull more troops from that location? Or do you move them in from Kherson and reinforce Zaporizhia and stuff like that, right? So Russia will now be forced to shuffle around troops all along the front line, because if a section of the front line becomes so weak that Ukraine can gain an advantage, you can't pull more troops from there. Then you have to pull them from somewhere else, or possibly even reinforce that front line before Ukraine can gain even more ground, right? So this is what Ukraine is after. I think they had hoped to weaken this front, but since that didn't happen, it's now Plan B and exploit weaknesses wherever they occur along the front line to force Russia to rethink every step, basically. Do we want to weaken Zaporizhia further? Do we want to weaken the push here towards the river Oskil and so on? Yeah, so this has caused a lot of problems for Russia because they don't want to weaken the front line and allow Ukraine to push through anywhere. They don't want to give up Pokrovsk because they need Pokrovsk for strategical success here in this area over here to get in behind Kramatorsk and other towns and cities. So they need to slowly rearrange troops from this established front line and get them up here and gather force strong enough to be able to push Ukraine out without losing stability. And Ukraine keeps pushing here and there, forcing Russia to reevaluate where they can pull troops from. And as it says here from the Kyiv Independent on the 23rd of August, which is today, I think, Kyiv launches counterattack in Kharkiv Oblast. A bit, it's not misleading, but when we think of Kharkiv Oblast, we think about that northern push. But this is, let's see here, 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, as it says, advanced almost 2 square kilometers deep into the frontline area. And they've released videos of what is claimed was the first footage of an offensive in full swing, like I talked about. So where are we located doing all of this? They have been known to operate around the village of Borova in Kharkiv Oblast. And where is Borova? It's not up here. It is actually down here. Borova is located basically here where I have the dot now. Russia has been trying to reach Borova a couple of times. Last year, if you remember, they made a big push along a highway here from Svatove, a supply hub for Russia. So they gathered a big force here and made a big push, and Ukraine just in time contained it and managed to push Russia back, but they still held some territory, and they have tried this a couple of times since, but they have been contained every time. And now, in this area where we have the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, they've now actually pushed in and retaken lost territory, right? Some 2 square kilometers. That's not a lot, to be honest, but it's still something. They are potentially exploiting the fact that Russia is weakening the front line. And also this push, like I said, now they're pushing towards Svatove. Russia will have to allocate forces to secure this front line, not just countering up here, not just supporting Pokrovsk. They need to strengthen this front line, and their numbers are not infinite. The Russian numbers are finite, which is why they're moving troops around and not just sending in reinforcements from across the country to deal with Kursk. They have to pull troops from here because there's, like I said, their numbers are finite. Right? They can't just allocate manpower and get them where soldiers magically pop up from some training ground somewhere. That's not the deal. Russia has a limited number of soldiers, and to deal with this, they have to pull them from the front line along all of Ukraine. So this push could potentially cause some concern for Russia. And this is what Ukraine is after now. Russia is moving troops from the front line, the established front line, and Ukraine can exploit that fact at various locations, causing headache for Russia. So, Russia has lost 70,000 casualties, dead and wounded, before even reaching Pokrovsk. Russia lost some 47,000 casualties at Avdiivka, a city that was abandoned before any real fighting took place in the city center. At Bakhmut, Russia is said to have lost 20,000 killed and 80,000 wounded. Prigozhin himself claimed that Wagner suffered 20,000 dead at Bakhmut. Russia requires at least 6 to 8 months to reach operational success at any given location. And to achieve this, they will suffer at least 50,000 casualties to be successful at the end of those 6 to 8 months. Russia attacked into Kharkiv from the north with 30,000 troops against an unprepared Ukrainian defense. Russia quickly found themselves having trouble as Ukrainian reinforcements moved in. Soon enough, Russia had to allocate another 20,000 to the area to maintain the advance. Russia has since not been able to push into Ukraine and has failed to conquer the city of Volchansk. Russia will not be able to secure Kursk Oblast in 2024, not without allocating massive amounts of manpower and equipment to the area. As time goes on and we approach 2025, pressure will mount in Moscow to see success in Kursk Oblast. This will, as each week passes, as each month passes, force Russia to move more and more troops from the established front lines of Ukraine to fight in Kursk. This hopefully will allow Ukraine to free up troops to fight elsewhere. Ukraine can move troops to help at Pokrovsk, a city battle that should continue well into 2025, hopefully, and even push the advantage at certain locations along the front line to force Russia back. And I kind of highlighted all of this on the 12th of August when I made a video called Russia Cannot Retake Kursk Territory Without Accepting Defeat Somewhere Else. And in that video I also got the numbers wrong of Bakhmut. I think I said that Russia lost 30,000. Not sure. I think I misread an article if that was a particular battle something. Or anyway, I got those numbers wrong. And the bottlenecks, the pro-Russians, they, oh my God, did they not like that video? They complained and, basically said, ha ha ha, Russia will solve Kursk in no time without having to move troops around at all. Yet here we are. A couple of days later, 10 days later. So yeah, Russia is now moving troops around. They can't deal with Kursk without weakening other sections of the front line. Like I said on the 12th. So it's happening. And also, remember, 70,000 troops to reach as far as they have outside of Pokrovsk without pushing into Pokrovsk. And 50,000 at Kharkiv, having had little success at all. So take a look at how tiny those advances are on the map compared to Ukraine up in Kursk. They have to push into that blue blob in Kursk. And so far, if you take a look at what's going on in Ukraine, Russia will not be able to do it. It will cost them 50, 60, 70,000 casualties to make a dent in the territory that Ukraine is currently occupying in Kursk Oblast. And that is why, and as that keeps going, Russia will be forced to move more and more and more manpower to Kursk, weakening the front line overall. And then in 2025, we will see some real changes on the battlefield, is my guess. So it kind of comes down to a chicken race to who will break first. Russia is hellbent on reaching Pokrovsk, that much is clear, and for good reason. They are keeping the eye on the ball. Don't make no mistake about it. But once they reach the city, that battle won't be over in a week or two. That battle will more than likely continue well into 2025. if we are to go by how Russia has conducted themselves previously in this war. And that will result with Russia suffering insane casualties. At the same time, Russia will need to send more and more troops to Kursk to force Ukraine out of Russia itself. So the question now becomes, will Ukraine commit to holding on to Kursk and force Russia to abandon any further attempts in Ukraine until Kursk is secured? Or will Russia be able to push deeper into Ukraine after Pokrovsk and convince Ukraine to abandon the incursion into Kursk Oblast to stabilize the front line within Ukraine itself? Looking at the Russian gains at Kharkiv and Pokrovsk, it becomes increasingly clear when you compare them to Ukraine's incursion into Kursk that Russia will have to sacrifice well beyond 50,000 troops to stand a chance of taking back lost territory in the Kursk Oblast. 50,000 has completely failed in Kharkiv. 70,000 dead and wounded trying to reach Pokrovsk. 47,000 dead and wounded taking Avdiivka. 100,000 dead and wounded taking Bakhmut. I think it's quite clear that Russia will struggle in Kursk, and it could potentially break them within Ukraine. So yeah, Pokrovsk and Kursk, a chicken race. Who will break first? We will have to see. Ukraine wants this to continue for quite some time. That is how they will break Russia, forcing Russia to allocate manpower away from Ukraine into Kursk. So Ukraine wants this to go on for months and months. Russia is hoping to have a quick success, I guess, at Pokrovsk, forcing Ukraine to rethink where they need manpower the most in case Russia begins operations in full north of Pokrovsk. So we'll see what happens, but it's quite clear that if Ukraine wants to stay in Kursk, I mean, it's gonna be horrendous for the Russian army trying to push Ukraine out, simply put. But enough of that. Hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine. Give them hell.